I'm going to tell you the 5 best resources that I found most effective in my first 2 years in medical school. Hey YouTube, Zach here. If you're a rising first year medical student or a current first or second year medical student, you probably thought about what resources should I use to study in my first 2 years of medical school, and which resources should I use to prepare for step 1. The biggest mistake that people make first is using too many resources. I think you should narrow down to about 4 to 5 resources that you use consistently in your first 2 years of medical school to prepare for your medical school exams and for step 1. I think if you spread yourself a little bit too thin and use too many resources, those resources you use are going to become less effective. Obviously, the best resource to use is the one that works for you. And the only way to figure that out is to try a bunch of resources. So, with the caveat of you should try a bunch of resources, find out which ones work for you, I'm going to tell you the 5 best resources that I found most effective in my first 2 years of medical school. Your medical school lectures. Now, this might be obvious for some of you. Why would you not use your lectures at medical school? And it may be a little surprising for some of you who have already gone through a year or two at medical school. There's a lot of secondary resources out there, which oftentimes a lot of them are more effective than your medical school lectures at preparing for step 1. Now, the problem is these things don't often prepare you well for your medical school exams that are specific to your university. So in order to get those medium to low yield things that you're going to miss on your medical school exams if you just use secondary resources to study, I suggest you use your lectures to study. Now, I don't think that you should use these exclusively. I think your lectures should supplement the secondary resources you're using to study initially. Medical school lectures are somewhat important to your study regimen. Number 4, Amboss. Amboss in general, just as a tool to look things up versus Googling things, is extremely valuable and underrated. Amboss is also a Q bank. I think preparing for step 1 during your dedicated period, your primary Q bank should be UWorld. However, to supplement that Q bank, you can use the Amboss Q bank. Also, during your first 2 years before step 1, you can be using the Amboss Q bank to prepare for your medical school exams and also to get an idea of what these step questions are going to look like before you're even thinking about step. I think they're a great way to prepare for the exam. I think they're a great supplementation resource for step 1. Amboss is super useful in your first 2 years of medical school. It becomes even more useful in your 3rd and 4th because you can use it as a resource to look things up while you're on rounds and actually taking care of patients. It's a more accessible, easier thing to navigate than something like UpToDate. However, obviously you should use UpToDate and PubMed and all these other resources to look up actual papers. But if you want to just briefly read about something or you forgot something about a certain disease process, Amboss is a phenomenal tool to quickly look that up on your phone. Amboss can be a little prohibitive because it's one of the most expensive resources you can get. A lot of the times school will have group codes, so wait until those come out before you purchase Amboss. But if you do have the funds or you do get a significant discount, definitely consider purchasing a subscription to Amboss. Number 3, Sketchy. Sketchy is one of the quintessential medical school resources. If you haven't heard about it, it's a resource that uses the method of loci, which is placing information within a tangible environment so that you can recall that information a lot easier. Sketchy Medical provides sketches, which are images, and within the images they have different objects or scenes, and those objects or scenes represent things that you should remember in medicine, like antibiotics or different disease pathologies. I found the most useful thing about Sketchy is learning micro and learning farm. These are two things that require a lot of rote rehearsal and just memorization of facts. And Sketchy really makes it easy so that you actually internalize all that information. I think Sketchy is a very useful resource to use throughout first and second year of medical school. Number 2, Pathoma. If you pay for the subscription, which is very reasonable, you get the book and you also get access to a bunch of videos. If anything, just purchase the book and read the first 2 chapters. These are the most highest yield things that you can read to prepare for step 1. Pathoma also has body systems based chapters, which are extremely useful to go through before you have your body systems exams, and the videos are very well done. It's one of the most reasonably priced resources, and I think you get the biggest bang for your buck with Pathoma. And again, those first 2 chapters are some of the most high yield things you need for step 1 preparation. And our number 1 resource is Anki. I think maybe a lot of you saw this coming. Those of you who are already medical students or starting soon probably know what Anki is. If you don't know what Anki is and you're starting medical school, you should find out, because it's the most effective tool you can use to learn how to study medicine. It's a flashcard service. Spaced repetition, which is what flashcards are, repeating the same content over and over again throughout time. And as you learn that content, you don't need to repeat that content as frequently. So you'll see a card one day, and then you'll see it tomorrow, and then you'll see it 6 days later. And you can set those time frames up. And I can do another video on how to optimize Anki at one point. It's a way to repeat material that you've already learned and make sure that you retain that. That's the only way to retain all the information in medical school. Otherwise, it's nearly impossible. The other thing about Anki is you can load decks onto it that are already pre-made. The best deck you can use is the Anki deck, which is a step 1 and step 2 deck that you can use to also study for your medical school exams that are specific to your institution. It's the most effective way to study for those exams, and what the cards allow you to do is add things from other resources onto the card itself. So there's a little section where you can add first aid material or Pathoma material, and there's a block where you can add your material from your university specific lectures. So as you're studying for those lectures, you can take a screenshot of the lecture slide or type a little note yourself and use those cards as your notes versus doing handwritten notes, so that when you see them, you can open up that lecture section and study the actual lecture slide from the card itself versus going back and studying the actual notes that you took, which you shouldn't take notes. I'll make several videos about Anki and how to optimize it, how to use it, what it really is. But if you're not using Anki already, you don't have the Anki deck downloaded, do it now, right after this video ends. Learn how to use it and come back and watch those videos that I make on Anki. Alright, so that was the top 5 resources you can use in your first 2 years of medical school. Again, the best resources are the ones that work for you. I think you should try a bunch out and then narrow it down to, like I said, 4 or 5 resources that work best, so that you don't use a ton and you're really optimizing your time and your usage of those resources. But I think the 5 that I listed are a good start, and if anything, you don't use anything else besides Anki, then that's fine. I think everybody should be using Anki because it is absolutely the most effective tool you can use to study in medical school. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you like this content, you want to hear more, especially if you want to hear about Anki and how to optimize your decks, and I'll see you in the next video.